Welcome back to G Fun Facts Online. Today, we are going to dismantle a myth that has persisted for over a century. It is a myth that you have likely seen in museum dioramas, in history books, and in movies. It is the image of the Ice Age defined by a single, thundering moment, the Mammoth Hunt. When we think of the Paleolithic era, we picture fur-clad men, muscles taut, hurling heavy spears at shaggy giants against a backdrop of endless white tundra. It is a narrative of brute force, of high-stakes survival, and of the singular dominance of the spear. We have painted our ancestors as apex predators who lived and died by the sharpness of their flint points. But this view is incomplete. It is a history written in stone and bone, heavily biased by what survives the ravages of time. Flint arrowheads last forever, but the delicate work of plant fibers, the intricate knots of a weaver, and the soft meshes of a net? They rot away, leaving no trace in the dirt. Because of this preservation bias, we have long underestimated the softer side of Stone Age engineering. We have missed the quiet revolution that was happening alongside the mammoth hunts, a revolution of string, knot, and trap. That changed dramatically in late 2024 with a revelation from the banks of the Rhine River in Germany. Deep within the archives of the Gönnersdorf archaeological site, a team of researchers led by the Monrepos Archaeological Research Center and Durham University used 21st-century technology to unlock a secret hidden in plain sight for 15,800 years. Etched onto ancient slate tablets were not just pictures of animals, but technical diagrams of a sophisticated technology, fishing nets. These engravings, invisible to the naked eye for decades, have shattered the brute force narrative. They reveal that the Magdalenian people, the final culture of the Upper Paleolithic, were not just hunters, they were engineers. They possessed a deep understanding of hydrodynamics, textile production, and mass capture strategies. They were not merely surviving. They were innovating, creating complex tools to harvest the bounty of the rivers, ensuring their survival through the harshest winters Europe has ever known. This is the story of the Ice Age engineers, and how a few scratches on a rock have rewritten the history of human innovation. To understand the magnitude of this discovery, we must first understand the place where it was found. Gönnersdorf is not a dark, damp cave. Located in the central Rhineland of Germany, it was once a bustling, open-air settlement. Around 15,800 years ago, during the dying days of the last Ice Age, this site was a seasonal metropolis for hunter-gatherers. The landscape was a treeless steppe, a cold, arid environment where herds of reindeer, wild horses, and woolly rhinoceroses roamed. But the people here did not live in squalor. They built sturdy, tent-like dwellings with slate-paved floors, heated by hearths that burned bone and fat. And they were prolific artists. Excavations between 1968 and 1976 uncovered a staggering hoard of art, over 400 engraved plaquettes. These are flat slabs of schist, or slate, that served as the sketchbooks of the Ice Age. These stones were covered in drawings. Some depicted the animals they hunted in breathtaking naturalistic detail: horses with wind-blown manes, woolly mammoths with high-domed heads, and lions on the prowl. But Gönnersdorf is most famous for its stylized human figures. Hundreds of engravings depict women, rendered without heads or feet, their bodies reduced to a distinctive profile that emphasizes the buttocks and torso. These Gönnersdorf figurines became icons of Paleolithic art, analyzed for decades by scholars looking for meaning in their abstraction. For 50 years, these plaquettes sat in museum drawers. Archaeologists believed they had cataloged everything worth seeing on them. However, slate is a difficult medium. It is dark, layered, and prone to cracking. The ancient artists often engraved new images over old ones, creating a chaotic jumble of lines known as a palimpsest. To the naked eye, many of these stones looked like nothing more than scratched rocks. The fish were there, swimming in the stone, but they were ghosts. The incisions were too faint, too shallow, or too obscured by the noise of other scratches to be recognized. It would take a leap in digital imaging technology to drain the water from the stone and reveal the catch hidden within. The breakthrough came when Dr. Jérôme Robitaille of the Monrepos Archaeological Research Center, along with colleagues from Durham University, decided to re-examine the Gönnersdorf plaquettes using a technique called reflectance transformation imaging, or RTI. Think of RTI as giving an archaeologist a magical flashlight. In a standard photograph, the lighting is fixed. If a shadow falls the wrong way, a shallow groove in a rock might disappear completely. RTI solves this by taking dozens of photos of the object from a stationary camera position, but with the light source moving to a different angle for every shot. A computer algorithm then stitches these images together into a single interactive digital model. This allows researchers to virtually move the light source around the object on their screen. They can simulate a sunset casting long shadows across the surface, or a spotlight hitting it from directly above. They can even mathematically enhance the surface reflectivity, making the stone look like chrome to highlight every microscopic deviation. When Dr. Robitaille applied this digital lens to the Gönnersdorf stones, the chaos of scratches resolved into order. On 8 specific plaquettes, a distinct pattern emerged. The researchers saw fish. These were not the vague fish-like shapes seen in other cave art. They were clearly salmonids, trout or salmon, distinguishable by their fusiform bodies and forked tails. But it was what surrounded the fish that changed everything. Overlying the bodies of the fish were rigid, geometric grids. Cross-hatched lines formed diamond and square meshes. The grids were not background texture. They were superimposed directly over the animals. Crucially, the RTI analysis allowed the team to determine the ductus. That is the order in which the lines were cut. They discovered a consistent sequence. The artist had engraved the fish first, and then, with deliberate strokes, carved the grid over the top of it. This was not a decorative pattern, it was a narrative. It was a technical illustration of a fish being trapped. The artist was not just drawing a fish. They were drawing the event of fishing. They were documenting the moment the wild animal was contained by human technology. The grids found on the Gönnersdorf plaquettes are arguably the oldest technical blueprints in human history. They depict a container that exceeds the size of the fish, surrounding it completely. This strongly suggests the use of gill nets or lift nets. A gill net hangs in the water like a curtain. It is invisible to the fish. When the fish swims into it, its head passes through the mesh, but its body is too wide. When it tries to back out, the twine catches behind its gill covers, trapping it. The Gönnersdorf engravings show the mesh completely enveloping the prey, aligning perfectly with the mechanics of this method. Other engravings on the plaquettes suggest traps or weirs. Some images show the fish positioned within a funnel-like structure. This corresponds to wicker traps, which are conical baskets placed in currents to guide fish into a holding chamber from which they cannot escape. Now consider the implications of this. The existence of these nets implies a vast, invisible industry that supported the Magdalenian way of life, textile production. To make a net, you cannot simply find materials, you must manufacture them. The process is complex and labor-intensive. First, you need specific plants. Milkweed, nettle, and willow bast, the inner bark of trees, are the likely candidates. These must be harvested at the right time of year when the fibers are strongest. Next comes retting. The plant stalks are soaked in water to rot away the pectin and woody pulp, leaving only the long, flexible fibers. Then comes processing. The fibers are scraped, combed, and dried. Then spinning. The fibers are twisted together to create cordage. This requires torque, rolling fibers on the thigh, or using a drop spindle. Finally, knotting. The cordage is knotted into a mesh. This requires a gauge to keep the mesh size even and a shuttle. The Gönnersdorf engravings imply that all these steps were common knowledge 15,800 years ago. The grid patterns are regular and controlled, suggesting a standardized mesh size, likely tailored to the specific size of the migrating salmon or trout in the Rhine. This industry was likely the domain of women, children, and the elderly. While the mammoth hunter model focuses on the athletic prowess of young males, the net maker model reveals the value of communal labor. A net is a community asset. It takes weeks to make, but can catch hundreds of fish in an hour. The discovery of these engravings validates other, more subtle clues found at Gönnersdorf and similar sites. We have found delicate bone needles with tiny eyes and impressions of twisted fibers found on clay fragments. We now know these weren't just for sewing fur patches. They were part of a sophisticated textile technology capable of industrial-scale food production. But why did these people need nets? The answer lies in the changing world around them. The Magdalenian period, roughly 17,000 to 12,000 years ago, was a time of population growth and climatic instability. Relying solely on reindeer and mammoth is risky. Herds move, fail to appear, or die off. To support larger populations, humans had to diversify. Archaeologists call this the broad-spectrum revolution. Humans began exploiting smaller, faster, and harder-to-catch resources: birds, rabbits, and, crucially, fish. Fish are high in protein and essential fatty acids, specifically omega-3s, which are vital for brain development and healthy pregnancies. However, catching fish one by one with a spear is inefficient. You burn almost as many calories waiting and striking as you gain from the meal. The net changed the equation. It turned fishing from a game of luck into a game of mathematics. A net placed in a migration bottleneck, like a shallow part of the Rhine during the salmon run, could yield tons of food in a few days. This surplus could be smoked, dried, and stored for the winter. The Gönnersdorf nets were not just tools, they were insurance policies against starvation. The engravings are corroborated by the physical evidence at the site. Excavations at Gönnersdorf uncovered fish remains, primarily salmonids. In the acidic soil of the region, fish bones dissolve quickly, so finding any at all is significant. The presence of these bones, combined with the art, confirms that fish were a staple of the diet, not an occasional snack. One of the most striking aspects of the Gönnersdorf fish engravings is their style. The horses and mammoths at the site are drawn with beautiful naturalism, with curved lines, shaded bellies, and realistic proportions. The fish, however, are abstract. They are stiff, geometric, and minimalist. Why the difference? The researchers argue that this abstraction signals a different relationship with the subject. The horse was an individual soul, a peer in the landscape. The fish, however, was perhaps viewed as a collective resource, a crop to be harvested. Or, perhaps the abstraction is the point. The focus of the art was not the animal, but the technology. The grid is drawn with as much care as the fish. This might be the first instance of an instructional diagram, or a celebration of human ingenuity. The artist wasn't saying, "Here is a fish." They were saying, "Here is how we catch the fish." The study also highlighted the use of pareidolia, the psychological phenomenon where the brain sees patterns in random data, like seeing faces in clouds. The Gönnersdorf artists were masters of this. They often chose plaquettes with natural cracks, ridges, or quartz veins that resembled the back of a fish or the ripple of water. They would then add a few engraved lines to complete the image. This suggests a worldview where the art was already waiting inside the stone, and the human's job was merely to release it. In the case of the nets, the grid lines often interact with the natural texture of the slate, creating a 3D effect where the fish appears to be thrashing beneath the mesh. This dynamic quality suggests the art may have been used in storytelling or ritual, perhaps to invoke a successful catch before the season began. This discovery forces us to look at other Paleolithic sites with fresh eyes. If the people of the Rhine were using nets 15,800 years ago, It is almost certain that groups in France, Spain, and Eastern Europe were doing the same. We know that in the older Gravettian period, around 30,000 years ago, people at Dolní Věstonice in the modern-day Czech Republic were making cordage, as impressions of woven mats have been found there on fired clay. However, Gönnersdorf provides the first direct visual representation of the nets in action. It connects the dots between the clay impressions of the East and the cave paintings of the West. It fills the silence of the archaeological record with the sound of rushing water and the splash of a trapped salmon. The Ice Age engineer is a figure that deserves to stand alongside the Ice Age hunter. These people understood the properties of materials. They knew that the inner bark of a willow tree, when twisted, becomes stronger than the sum of its parts. They understood the geometry of the mesh, knowing that a diamond shape deforms to hold a struggling fish while a square might let it slip. They understood the behavior of their prey, predicting the seasonal runs of salmon with precision. The Gönnersdorf nets are a testament to the cognitive complexity of our ancestors. They were not just reacting to the environment, they were shaping it. They were building technologies that allowed them to extract energy from the landscape more efficiently, paving the way for the population booms that would eventually lead to agriculture and settled life. The 15,800-year-old slate engravings of Gönnersdorf are more than just ancient doodles. They are a patent application for a survival machine. They remind us that the history of humanity is not just a history of weapons, but a history of tools. For 15 millennia, the evidence of this ingenuity lay hidden in the dark, scratched surface of the stone, waiting for a light bright enough to reveal it. Now that we have seen it, we can never look at the Ice Age the same way again. We see not just a frozen wasteland, but a landscape alive with industry, where the rivers were harvested by the clever hands of the first engineers. The spear may have killed the mammoth, but the net fed the people. Thanks for listening to this episode of Fun Facts Online.